Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and y'all, it is getting wild over at the Texas Capitol, and Texans of faith are in the midst of all of it, with thousands of phone calls going in every week, members of Texas Impact's issue team staying up until all hours of the night giving testimony, and the Texas Impact staff busting their tails working on behalf of our membership. I hope you're all taking full advantage of all the Texas Impact resources on the Action Center page of our website, and that you're following along with the highlights on Texas Impact's Ledge TV channel on YouTube. And if you've been paying attention to the legislature at all, or if you've been on social media, or if you're paying attention to the news, you'll know that the voucher or education savings account bill has been front and center over the last few weeks. It really seems like many of the other issues are in limbo while that bill gets worked out. As a reminder, the Senate passed their ESA voucher bill, Senate Bill 2, early on, and this week the House Public Education Committee had a hearing on their bill, House Bill 3. That hearing went 22 and a half hours, with opposition from across the state and across the political and ideological spectrum. That committee is now deliberating to determine their next steps, which means it's important that Texans of faith mobilize our communities to talk to our legislators about why we support public schools and why diverting public dollars to private schools would harm our communities. And you've been doing great work, but we have to keep up those efforts to bring even more people into the conversation, and I believe we're up for it. And we're going to talk more about all of that today with our two guests, Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead, and outside legislative counsel, Beaman Floyd. So let's get right to it. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Joining us for this week's conversation is two of our favorite humans here on the podcast, Beaman Floyd and Texas Impact's Executive Director, B. Moorhead. Beaman, B, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It seems like the legislature is now real. For the last several weeks, we've been talking about things that were to come, but it's pretty hot and heavy over there right now. How are you two hanging in?
Well, it's I think that's true. We're coming up on the 60th day of the legislative session, which means two things. One is that we're coming up on the bill filing deadline, so we'll finally know how many bills we're going to have for this session. We're at about 8,000 plus right now, and expecting a whole bunch more today and tomorrow.
Are we setting records? That seems like a big number.
We are very much setting records for the number of bills filed this legislative session. And the other thing the 60th day signals is that once we are past this day, both the Senate and the House can start passing bills out of their respective chambers to one another that are not emergency items. So all the bills will now be eligible for hearing and passage on the Senate floor and the House floor. So yeah, it's real.
It's real.
Yeah.
B, you hanging in there? You feeling all right?
Yeah, I'm just really enthusiastic about the level of participation we're getting from our folks. I mean, you and I have been talking about that at the beginning of the year, we had a little bit of concern that maybe people would be tired and feeling discouraged about stuff and that they wouldn't want to participate. And that just hasn't been the case at all. So it's been really exciting to see people engage.
In fact, Beaman talked about the record number of bills. B talked about the level of engagement, and we certainly saw a ton of engagement on the one bill that is maybe drawing the most attention early in this legislative session, or maybe the two bills. So we are recording this on Thursday. Of Tuesday of this week, there was a hearing in the House Public Education Committee on House Bill 3, which is the voucher bill on the House side, education savings account bill. That hearing went for 22 and a half hours from beginning to end, with a little break in the middle for them to go to the House floor, with a lot of opposition across the political spectrum in that hearing. So I just wanted to open up the conversation today with some reflections from the two of you about what you saw in that hearing and what impact it might have moving forward.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. First of all, there were almost 400 registered witnesses, just shy of 400 registered witnesses in the hearing, which for those of you who are interested is a lot. That's an extremely large number of witnesses for a public hearing. As you said, it went long, which kind of is interesting because what we did not see that one normally sees is once a hearing goes about 12 or 15 hours, you start to see some pretty big attrition in the number of witnesses that are really sticking it out. And a lot of people really stuck it out. For this.
I probably should admit this, but at about 4 a.m., I was kind of hoping that maybe some of those people would not be there, so it would end a little earlier. But you're right. They were there. And I'll say props to the legislators because they were also there.
You bet.
Right?
You bet.
Kind of to the bitter end.
They hung and heard that bill. They cut off a registration for public testimony at 8 p.m., but by then they had this large number of people registered. And so it was a robust hearing. To be sure, with a lot of point of views expressed in that hearing, and a kind of I won't say bewildering because it wasn't bewildering per se, but an unexpected diversity of opinion on the bill from a variety of points of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just add to that if there was any frustration for the public witness portion of the testimony, it would have been that the public testimony didn't start till way late. That is actually because the invited panels took so long. And the reason they took so long was that legislators were asking them, for the most part, substantive questions that were moving the conversation forward. So I think in terms of the robustness of the hearing, I would add to what Beaman said that it was really substantive. It was meaty. Like if you watch that hearing, you get a master class in this issue for sure.
That's right. So if you have a spare 22 and a half hours and didn't see the hearing, I think you can go back and watch the full recording.
Good news. We have the highlight reels.
Yeah, it's good to watch. Yeah.
Definitely watch the highlights. If anybody goes back and watches all 22 and a half hours, I'll give you a gold star and a high five and maybe buy you some caffeine or something. But for sure, check out Ledge TV because there are a ton of clips. And I posted on Twitter, which is now, I guess, X, that's so impressed with the Ledge TV team for turning around video clips at 4 o'clock in the morning.
No,
so
without question.
Props to all who are working on that. But talk about the content. You talked about the idea that it was a substantive conversation. Do you feel like it moved the needle with legislators, or what content do you think came out of that might benefit their deliberations?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of probably the most interesting thing that I saw in summary was the diversity of opposition, because you had folks who have been long-standing advocates for public education who think that the ESAs are damaging to public education. They were obvious. We knew they were there, and many Texas Impact members among them. You had some opposition, however, from traditional Republicans who said, I'm a Republican, lifelong Republican, but on this issue, we think that the Republicans have it wrong. You had opposition from folks who said, look, we don't like government schools, but we think that taking public money and sending them to private schools or homeschool people is a government intrusion into those non-governmental spaces. And so we are skeptical or even very nervous about any kind of ESA or voucher program because we do not think that public money will come to us without strings. And so those were three sort of big oppositional spaces, and then a host of other opposite. There was a little bit of opposition from people who are very much sort of they were characterized in a lot of the comments that were made about Milton Friedman, and where they said we are actually against this bill because we don't think it's aggressive enough, and we think that we should be looking for the end of government schools. And the entirety of the abolishment of these taxes and a complete freedom to choose, as Milton Friedman would have said, on public education. So it was a real array of opposition, which I found surprising. There were also obviously some very strong advocates in favor of the ESA. But to watch all of that together, I think, was really, really interesting and really informative.
Yeah, I agree with that. The Milton Friedman comment just kind of makes me say, like, when I say it was a masterclass, I don't just mean on what Texans or Texas legislators think about vouchers. It was a masterclass on this whole area of economic thought.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
that there was sometimes, we've both had this experience where legislators are asking the questions, but they don't really care about the answer. We've had the experience where somebody gets up and does testimony and you think, geez, there's a bunch of interesting questions somebody could ask that person, and they don't, because they just want it to be over with. In this case, they were asking the questions and the answers, they were interested in the answers, and so were all the people who were watching. So I think it was a deep dive that needed to happen. And it's not surprising to me that there are a lot of people who would say they're really thinking about it now. It's making them think about the issue in a way where before they may have just said, well, I'm a knee-jerk whatever, right? I don't know that I particularly need to parse it in my own mind. Now they're saying, well, geez, now it turns out it's a really interesting issue and I want to think about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that's healthy regardless of what side of the issue you're on.
Sure.
I think in some ways this was a broad political issue, and a policy conversation has broken out.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would completely agree with that.
Yeah.
And so take us behind the curtain on that, because I received several text messages after I woke up from my morning nap Tuesday morning about people being surprised that it was left pending, right? And not a surprise to us, and probably not a surprise to folks who've been in our meetings that they weren't going to pass it and debate it after 22 and a half hours overnight. But what's happening now? Because it does seem like there was a lot of substantive conversation and things that folks from both sides were saying maybe we need to tweak or look at. So what's happening behind the scenes now, and what's the next step coming through the House?
Oh, well, I think exactly what B said. First of all, I would say to folks who are tuning into the legislative process for the first time, the norm for bills is to be left pending.
Yeah.
So normally when a bill is heard, particularly this early in the legislative session, it is left pending just for the purpose of just laying it out there, taking a look at it, reviewing the testimony, considering what your vote is going to be, and then when the committee is called to vote on the bill, and frankly some behind the scenes vote counting, to have a sense of what that vote count is going to look like, instead of it being we don't know, let's take a vote and see, to see whether or not a bill has to be amended to actually get a passing vote out of committee. All of that is taking place right now on this bill. And I think one of the complexities is, again, that because the opposition was as diverse as it was, some real consideration of, is there a path forward in terms of amendments to secure votes for this bill? Is there a path forward in terms of some sort of change to the bill that would bring more people in as proponents of the bill? And I don't have the answers to those questions right now. We are obviously working actively in the legislature to figure this thing out, but this is a very interesting moment for this subject in this bill.
I think there's a couple of things that we'd be remiss if we didn't highlight. One of them is the level to which special ed was a really defining part of the conversation.
Very much so,
and
yeah.
Maybe there are different circumstances for a few people in the state that need to be handled differently, and that doesn't necessarily impact the entire public school population. That was something that got discussed a lot and was really, everything from legislators talking about, well, if we don't spend the money on this, how much extra special ed could we provide in the general, to I was going to say fighting, and then I thought, oh, well, not fighting. And now I would revise my remarks to say, no, I mean fighting on the dais about whose numbers are right, about what percentage of special ed kids are educated in different circumstances and have different kinds of special needs. All of that, I think, put me in mind of the first day I was at the LPJ school in 1990 or 89 or whatever. And Ernestine Glossbrenner, who at that time was a legislator who was working on public education, and she was talking to us about progress in public policy. And she said, when I was a school teacher, which was a real long time ago at this point, it was then too, she said, when I was a school teacher, if children were too poor or too sick or their parents weren't good people or they had different kinds of problems, we just didn't let them come to public school. And we know now that that was wrong. We know that that was wrong. And so we have to keep working to make a better and better system. And it really made me think, like, whatever position those legislators were in, they were having a conversation that they wouldn't used to have had. It didn't used to be, when Ernestine Glossbrenner was teaching school, no one would have been considering anything about kids with special needs or any of the other issues that came up. And it made me think about a saying from our Reformed tradition, I beseech you, think that you may be mistaken. The number of times that I heard someone in that hearing say, I used to think something and I changed my mind. I changed my mind because I had an experience, or I heard a story, or I did the research, or I read the data. And I just would encourage all of us to think, I mean, there's something so poignant about hearing people say, I used to think one thing and I changed my mind, as though it were an admission. I'm so sorry, I've changed my mind. Instead of saying, how could it be otherwise? I hope we keep changing our minds. I hope we keep learning together. And I hope that we make public policy not based on the old thing that we all said was true a long time ago and we've never been willing to investigate it again, but that we have the courage to say, no, I'm going to keep looking, and when the information changes, we need to change our approach.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will add to that, Scott. There is no question that some of the absolute most poignant testimony for and against ESAs was in the area of special education. There were folks who said, my child was not being served in my local school district, and I found that service somewhere else, and it was deeply important to me. There were people who said, I tried to get my kid into private schools, and they wouldn't take my child because they were special needs, and I have found that service in the public school space. And so it was a very interesting conversation, for sure, and quite emotional for me. For sure.
Yeah, I agree. And those were certainly some emotional moments. I think the other storytelling piece that came through to me was young people and sometimes teachers who talked about the current budget shortfalls in their district,
right,
and schools closing and programs going away and, losing teachers and all of those kinds of things. And so it was an important reminder that the reason we do this work, the reason we do the advocacy work, is to tell the story about what's happening in our communities so that legislators understand that and can craft public policy that makes lives better for people in our communities. And so talk to us about what folks should be doing over the coming weeks in terms of telling stories, talking with legislators about what's happening in our own communities.
Well, I'll start there because I've been beating this drum all day and I don't see any reason to stop now. It's clear that legislators are paying attention to what people are saying in their districts. It's less clear that the people in the districts understand the legislative process and understand what those interventions need to be like to give legislators all the information they need to use that for decision making. So we have a lot of people, we had almost 400 people sign up to testify that one day. Many of them were not able to stay because they have other commitments. So they didn't even speak their piece that time. We'll have an event next week where we'll have 200 people in the Capitol, and they will probably say things about this issue in their legislative visits. And then they will get on a bus and go home. And legislators will have to stay in the building and keep talking about it. It's really important that people maintain consistent, persistent communication with their own legislators, not to harry them or, beat them into submission in some way, but to build that relationship. And, the thing that I'm begging people to do is don't just keep saying what you think. Ask what they think, what they're hearing, how you can help, what they need to know, what gaps there are that you might be able to fill, because you're not there. It's not a spectator sport, and you're not there. You don't have a vote as a constituent. You don't get to vote on this bill. All you get to do is be in relationship with a person who has been assigned by you and people in your community to come here and make a really hard decision. So get in there with them and help. Don't just consume the policy spectacle as theater, because it's not.
Right. Yeah, and that is what is strangely, again, and we've said it time and again today, it's that this is a really, really robust policy conversation. One of the things that you can do for your, if you have already registered your opinion with your legislator, as many of our people I'm sure have, talk to your neighbors, and then say, call your legislator and say, additional information. I've talked to my neighbors, and this is a new angle, or this seems to be a consensus in my neighbor space or in the spaces of my community that I am in. Bring them something new, which means going out and finding something new. But keep that conversation going, not only with the legislator in their office, but in the community, and then with the legislator in their office. Because the more data they have on this, the better decision they're going to make.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like our folks, I hope this isn't true, but some of our folks might need some motivation. We have had a whole bunch of people, like thousands of telephone calls going in, like people are certainly mobilized. But this isn't a short-term project. I think the assumption is the House is hearing the bill this week. The Senate has already passed a version of the bill. This is all going to be knocked out soon, and we can all go back to our lives. We're still a long way from the finish line on this. And in fact, I was at a church potluck last night, because we do that on Wednesday nights, and somebody at the table next to me, because my wife was sitting there, started talking about the hearing and started talking about the voucher bill, they were calling it. And so they called me over to have a chat, and one of the people said, well, I made my call last week, but I assume this is done, right? Because there are a majority of the House is signed on as a co-sponsor, the Senate's passed the bill, it's done, right? We're still a long way from this being done, right? Talk to us about all of the potential pitfalls that still are there in front of this bill.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, the bill is very far along in the process relative to this time of year. So it is not a wrong thing to observe that this bill, because it was designated as an emergency item, because the Senate moved on it so very quickly, and the House then moved on it also very quickly. This bill is very far along in the process. That is not an erroneous observation. However, the bill still needs a vote in committee, and then it needs to be set by the Calendars Committee in the House of Representatives. And then it needs to be heard in the House of Representatives on the floor. And then it needs to be sent back to the Senate for concurrence with any amendments that it may pick up. If it goes back to the Senate unamended, it's finished. If it goes back to the Senate with amendments, two things happen. One is that the Senate and the House have to get together to hash out those amendments. And two, an amended bill needs to go to the governor's office for either a signature or a veto. And so, yeah, there's plenty left. in terms of this bill. There are, and I would say two things. One is the deliberations of this committee are clearly important. Were the committee completely finished and ready to go, that bill would have been voted either at the end of that hearing, or they would have called a formal meeting to vote the bill today. And those things, or yesterday or today, those things did not happen. The second thing that's important is when that bill is on the floor, we anticipate that there are going to be a lot of amendments prepared for it. And some amendments will be to basically gut the bill and make it not actually viable. Some amendments will be improvements and enhancements to make the bill more universal and fund it more. Some of the amendments will be in particular affinity spaces like special education or other places that rose in the committee meeting and in community conversations. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty left. With regard to an encouragement to our membership, I am gently nurturing my grandson, but I was also in the United States Army in combat arms. So which kind of encouragement do you think they need? I'm happy to offer whichever kind you think would be most effective.
Much like the committee, we have a wide range of folks who are listening. Give us both. Give us both.
Okay. Well, I'll consult with B and see what we can do in terms of some packages. All kidding aside, yeah, stay engaged in this. Stay with it. It's important.
Yeah, there's a long way to go. Also, there's 10 weeks to go. It's not an amount that's measured in years. It's an amount that we could measure it in days if we really want to, right? So it's not so overwhelming to think about doing a little something every week, right? One of our folks suggested maybe we should be having a happy hour once a week where we all get together and we just make that phone call. And I guess I think the thing about ideas like that is they center the idea that this is ultimately about a community. It's about the reason people do this isn't because they're going to get rich or because they are in a niche category of some sort. The reason that most people are engaging this issue, or in fact, the reason most people engage the policy process on issues like this is they care about their community. They care about where they live and their neighbors, and they want it to be a place they feel proud of and a place that they feel like people care about them and they care about other people. Well, engage the issue that way, right? So that'd be, I mean, I know what you mean. You want the encouragement of, we talked to a guy and the guy said, we just need this. That's what people always want to know. How many phone calls do they need to make it? What's definitive? That is just not how this works.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, Scott, a sort of way to frame it is, this is not a transaction. It's a relationship.
There you go.
And so approach it as a relationship, not as a transaction.
And to that end, there's one other thing that I think when we said the whole committee clearly doesn't know, they're not all settled, or they would have taken a vote, right? There's some reason that they feel they need to talk about amendments, or they need to have further discussion about something. So there are members of the committee who may have said things or may have had prior positions, and going to those people and saying, I always disagree with you, and I bet it will be the same this time, and I just basically don't like you, but I want you to vote the way I want you to vote. That's never really the winning strategy. As long as we're agreeing it's okay for people to change their minds, to see new evidence, to learn new things, and grow, don't exempt yourself out of that. Yeah. Be willing to agree that the way a relationship gets better is that both people come together, not just that one of them gives everything.
Yeah, and I think as people of faith in a very particular way, this is the kind of stuff we should be good at.
Yep.
Right? I mean, this is, we aspire in all of our faith traditions to actually be good at community and to be good at relationship. So
let's be good at it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's be good at it. Also, I just want to put B on the record because she said we have 10 more weeks of this, and I'm just like mentally reliving the endless special sessions in 2023, and I'm counting that as a prediction that won't happen this year, and I'm gonna hold you to that.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that is real. Again, those relationships are important, and you all, our listeners, have been doing such a great job over the first 60 days of the legislative session, building those relationships and having those conversations. But it is time to continue to reach out to more people in our communities and encourage them to do what you've been doing for these 60 days, because we have 81 more days as of recording of this work during the regular session. And this topic will be a big conversation for a lot of those days still to come. So have those conversations, build those relationships, keep representing your community to those who are representing you. Beaman, thanks for being here. Any closing thoughts before we close out today?
No, just keep it up, and we sure appreciate y'all.
Yep, absolutely. Go get them.
All right. Y'all are amazing. We'll look forward to talking again soon. Thank y'all.
Great. Thanks.
Hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with B and Beaman. Again, y'all have done some great work, but there is still more work to do if we want to protect our public schools from efforts to divert public dollars to private schools. If this is of particular interest to you, I'd encourage you to join the Public School Defenders. That team's been meeting weekly to support our public schools and determine how we can be effective in advocacy together. So go to the Action Center page at texasimpact.org to join that team or one of the many other teams Texas Impact has to offer. Also on that page, you can find our weekly action alert or sign up for the rapid response team to get that action alert emailed to you each week and to receive an invitation to join the weekly Marching Orders Monday Zoom for a weekly update and conversation with me and B. Y'all, now more than ever, Texans of Faith need a movement of Texans of Faith willing to speak up for our public schools and kids in our community and on all of the other issues that we're working on this session. So sign up today and invite a friend to do the same. Again, this work is way more fun when we do it together. If you have questions about anything we've talked about today, please reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. While you're on the website, I hope you'll take a moment to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of Faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. And before we go today, since I don't think we'll do a podcast on this in the near future, y'all, get your vaccinations. It is 2025 and we have a measles outbreak. For goodness sakes, come on, we can do better than this, Texas. All right. So as we close out, I think it's time we close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of Faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.